Okay, well, welcome back, everybody. I'm really excited today to be having a conversation with Faye Bryant. Faye is an author and a speaker and coach who she and I have so much in common. As we talk about our stories, we realize, wow, I walked that same journey. So it's really fun to be talking with her today and seeing the intersect between our lives and our messages now. So welcome, Faye. I'm so glad to have you with me.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Um, a little bit about myself. I am an author, also a speaker. I can speak and a coach. In my life, I have gained a lot of experience that helps me understand people where they're at and to be able to help lead them out
Yeah.
of where they are into thriving in life, to actually living. I say, this is what I say. I am an author, speaker, and coach who helps individuals escape the lies of the enemy and live into God's truth to build a better life by first feeling, dealing, and healing their way through a stuck future or an abused past into the deeper path of purpose and their unhackable life of their chosen legacy.
Wow. That's a lot to digest, but it is so good. It's so like I said, we just have so much intersect. And I love it because it's always exciting when you see the Holy Spirit doing the same things, in different places and through different people. And then it's his message and his truth, right? So
Yes.
why don't you show us really fast? I see your books there on the shelves behind you. Why don't you show us your books and tell us what you've written?
Okay. The first was Ramblings from the Shower: Integrity, Faith, and Other Simple Yet Slippery Issues, which was born from conversations between me and God in the shower, where, I would take time from my Bible study and mix it with news stories and things that I had heard and just talking those things over with him. And
Processing life.
yeah,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
working through it. And
Yeah.
so each of the little things I had said at some point, Lord, somebody needs to write a book about this. And
The famous last words of,
right.
of an author.
And it was so funny. One evening, my husband and I were out eating, and he just looked across the table at me and he said, Faye, I'm not sure how to say this. And I'm like, oh no, what? He said, I think you're supposed to write a book. And I said, okay. He was telling me that God was telling me, it's telling him I needed to write a book. And I said, what's it supposed to be about? And he said, I don't know. So I just looked at him and said, okay, go back and find out.
You hadn't really had this idea yourself to begin with.
No, it was
Interesting.
very much receiving that and saying, okay, Lord, because I thought at that point that I was supposed to write the series of novels that I am in the process with right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
But that wasn't the plan at that point.
Not the first
So,
to do.
so that was the first one. And then I had the idea, as I said back then, to write a novel about my grandmother's life, my mother's life, and my life, and how, yes, biologically we intersected, but our lives and so much in them, even though we weren't contemporaries,
Mhm.
but it was like so much of the same thing happened.
Yeah.
And so I started writing that. And when it got to be about the size of War and Peace, I thought it might be a good idea to break it into three. So that became the Grandma, Mom, and Me saga, which
Uh-huh.
started with Louise. That was Grandma. And then it went to Elena, and that was Mom. And Beth will be out in August of this year.
Okay. And clearly, so you used pseudonyms or alternative names for everybody,
Yes.
so that people's privacy is perfected or protected.
Yeah.
And it is interesting how there are legacies, both good and bad, and generational sins and just stuff that follows through families.
Hmm.
And if we don't deal with them, they can hold us back. Or
Yes.
alternatively, there are blessings that are passed on too. I look at some of the blessings that our family has just had over generations, and it's like, who are we to have these blessings? But they are carrying through the generations. But there have also been things that have carried through that are negative, and we have to deal with.
Yes.
And
I my faith has always just been there. I've just always believed in God, and then I came to salvation later, but just knowing that God is there, that's just always been. And as I was following in one of my aunt's footsteps, learning the tracking the genealogy of our family, as I look back in the generations, I find that there were men who served in Congress as the chaplains
mm,
across the sea before we immigrated to the United States. There were men who were the I don't know if they called them chaplains there or chancellors or whatever of the parliament.
interesting.
And so I'm like, so these were men of faith. And so I kind of have to figure that the whole family, that unit was just of faith and trust, and they believed in God, and that the blessing of them has traveled the thousand of
Yeah,
generations.
so good. And yet, let's get to the crux of what we want to talk about today. And yet, we can come from a heritage of faith, and we can come with that legacy, and yet we can struggle, and we all have our own faith journey to walk. And we're, just because we've got the faith of our fathers before us doesn't mean that we're not targets for the enemy. We are
Oh yeah,
definitely targets for the enemy,
maybe more
because
so.
exactly, because if we've got this history and this legacy of faith, what does he want to do? He wants to tear that apart and tear it down.
Right.
And so you and I, as we talk about the intersect, of course, between my book, Smudge Pages, and it's all about lies that I bought into in my life, yay, which are common. They're lies that are commonly bought into, especially by women, but by anybody. And one of those is this idea that I have to be the perfect Christian, because sometimes when we are raised in a faith environment, we have this idea of, oh, this is what a Christian's supposed to be, right? And this sort of um, formulaic approach to it, which
Hmm.
you and I both found ourselves in at one point.
Hmm.
Well, I know what I'm supposed to do, I know what I'm supposed to look like. Let's
Right.
talk about that a little bit.
Okay. I grew up with the mom that, when we went to church, we had on our church clothes. So we always had to look right. And so, that teaches, if you want to come to God, you have to be perfect. You have to be all dressed up. You have to have on the best clothing. You have to have your gloves on and your little hat on, and you have to just be perfect. And heaven help you if you're not. Um, but then as an adult, I was telling you earlier that I went to a church, um, and my husband and I were both very involved, and it was that as a woman I needed to be a part of this organization, and I needed to handle this ministry, and I needed to do this, and I needed to do this, and
Be in the ladies' Bible study, and
and the couples Bible study,
yeah.
and the right Sunday school class, and I had to look the same, look the right way, and the thing is these were not things that were imposed on me.
Sure.
These were the things I accepted on my own.
Yeah. Yeah.
That in order to be accepted, I had to look like what these other people looked like. I had to act like what these other people acted like. I had to use the right language, and and I fell apart.
Mm.
I fell apart. There was, like you said, there was so much from not only my past, but from my mother's and my grandmother's that had never been dealt with,
Mm.
that it just kept pressing on, just adding more and more and more on. And until that could be dealt with, none of the core issues in me could be.
Yeah.
And yeah, it took me to some very dark places.
You and I both.
Yeah.
We have similar stories of, you know, getting into depression and even just feeling like it's hopeless. Why should I be here? Might
Right.
as well just end it all, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I wonder, you know, and you said it's not something that was forced on you. But I think that, I mean, we live in a very uh curated culture now, especially with social media. You know, people create this persona of what they want people to think they are, and we wear masks. And the church should be our safe place. It should be the place where come as you are. You know, Jesus loves everybody, he accepts everybody, there's forgiveness and grace for everyone. And yet I almost feel like it's almost worse, you know, this elevated level of perfection and mask wearing. And do you have any thoughts on why that is?
Um, well, I think it's a fear thing. I think that all perfectionism is rooted in fear.
Yeah.
It's that you are afraid to be vulnerable. You're afraid to be wrong.
Yeah.
You know, we're afraid to have the wrong answer or to have no answer.
Yeah. And say, I
Um,
don't know.
right, right. But you know, I think that in the church world,
Mm-hmm.
we're all feeling it, and so we're not doing anything to stop it.
Mm.
And I have to tell you, shout out to Celebrate Recovery,
Oh,
because
yeah.
um, that that was the experience that rescued me from suicide.
Interesting. Okay.
And when you walk into a Celebrate Recovery meeting, you are very cognizant that these are not your typical church people.
Yeah. Yeah. Why don't you, for people who aren't familiar with, I am, but for who aren't familiar with Celebrate Recovery, that ministry, give a little lowdown.
Gotcha. It is a ministry that was started in Saddleback Church with Rick Warren and John Baker. And John Baker he passed away recently, was a alcoholic. And, you know, he knew the AA program and he knew all of the things, but he wanted something that was tied more closely to the Bible, naming the higher power as Jesus. And he wanted it to be something that would just glorify God
Yeah.
all the way around. And so he took a lot of the tenets of Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, because they work.
They do work. They're
But
really biblically based. The principles
yes,
are.
yes. And
Yeah.
so he took the 12 steps of those programs and melded them together with the Beatitudes and
Oh,
created
wow.
8 principles of Celebrate Recovery. Um, and then the order for any meeting is essentially that there would be some sort of fellowship, a meal or snacks, or, you know, something that there's going to be some kind of time to sit around tables and say, you know what, I'm as messed up as you are. And
Yes.
and so there's that. Then there is a church service. There is a time of worshiping together, corporate worship. And then there's what they call share groups. And those are divided up based on the habit, hurt, or hang up that you're dealing with.
Okay.
And that's what the basis in Alcoholics Anonymous. You have to be an alcoholic to participate.
Right.
In Narcotics Anonymous, you have to be an addict to
Right.
some narcotic, some kind of mind altering drug. That leaves all of us who are codependent or dealing with childhood trauma or whatever mental issues. That
Hiding
leaves
in the
us out.
closet. Yeah.
Yeah,
Hiding in the closet.
right.
Yeah.
And so
Pornography, whatever. Hmm.
gambling, whatever.
Yeah.
And so Celebrate Recovery offers help to anyone who has hurts,
Mm,
habits, or hangups.
mm.
So that's pretty much everybody.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so when you walk in, you know that everybody that's around you, when you walk through the food line, or you sit at a table, when you go into a share group, you know that the other people that you are sitting there and looking at have some sort of hurt, habit, or hang up, just like you do.
Yeah.
It may not be the same one, but they have something that they're hurting from, that they're struggling with. And so they're not looking
It
down their nose at you.
yeah, it tears away that label of perfection.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, so good. So good. So you did somebody recommend you do that, or you found Celebrate Recovery on your own, or
I have a friend who, thank God, I think she is above 10 years of her sobriety. She was heavily into drugs and alcohol. And she is now actually a counselor at a prison.
wow.
So that's just a whole other story.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
um, she had started attending it, and at that point, we had already had the discussion. Well, I can't go to NA because
Sure.
I'm not addicted, and I can't go
Right.
to AA because I'm
Right.
not an alcoholic. So what
Right.
do I do? I'm just stuck.
Right.
And so she said something about that. And at that point, I was spending every day trying to figure out a reason to not kill myself.
Mhm.
Just try to find one reason, one reason.
Mhm.
And I saw on Facebook where she had said that she was going to this group. And I said, is that for me too? And she said, absolutely. And I
Mhm.
was like, okay, I want to go. And she said, I'll meet you at the door.
That was very brave of you, Faye, to even be able to say to one person,
Yeah.
I'm struggling with this. Can this help me?
Well, and fortunately, having that relationship with her, she had already been dealing with her stuff.
Okay.
And so she knew she was the believer that didn't have the religion.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
And
So
so it
let's
was easy to be imperfect
she'd
around her.
already taken off that label and found it's really about finding the grace of God, like really truly
Yes.
understanding what grace is, and his mercy
Yes.
and grace, but we just so often don't really get it. Like, it gets preached to us, we hear it in Sunday school, we read it, but we don't get it. We don't
Right.
get it. And sometimes, unfortunately, some of us have to walk in a really dark place before God says, let me show you what my grace is
Yeah.
all about, right? But when
Yeah.
we get it, then yeah, it's so freeing, and we can say, okay, even just I've had a couple different things happen over the last month that would have been really big. They just would have derailed me a few years ago. And I've been able to say, well, okay, here's my part in that. This is the thing that I did wrong. And I can say I'm sorry, but I'm not going to take on all the guilt, and I'm not going to take on all the shame, and I'm not going to live in that place. I'm just going to say, I'm free. In God's grace, I am free. And when you
Yes.
can get to that place, that is so, like, it's very freeing. So that's a good segue. Let's talk about what you're doing to share that message now of hope and freedom with other people.
Well, one of the books, and I should have had it on my iPad to show you. I every day I write on social media a daily devotion, and I call it a view. It's the From My Comfy Chair with a View, and it's Coffee Bible Journal,
Yep,
and that's
I
the
love that
name
little
of the book.
catchphrase.
It's
Hmm.
an ebook
Okay.
and has great pictures in it. It's available on Amazon, and it's just a compilation of some of those daily devotions, which I continue to do. so I've done that. I've put those together. I do these daily. I started probably about a year ago to not only write them, but to voice them.
Speak them. Mm-hmm.
Right. So I speak, I essentially, I get on the camera and I read
Yep.
it, and then I add some thoughts to it.
Yeah.
And so I do that. And I also do speaking. It's like in April, I think it was April, went and spoke at a Celebrate Recovery group, sharing a message that I do. It's called Baggage.
Mm.
And what I do is I take on all those little pieces of the past, and I pick up a piece of luggage, a purse, or, I don't know, just all
Backpack or
kinds of
whatever.
different things, until at the very end, you can see that I cannot hold another piece. And so I'm explaining my way through all of that. And then at the end, I start talking about the realization is I didn't cause that, and I dropped something, and I didn't initiate that, and I dropped something else, and, and just keep taking all of that off.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and you can see freedom.
Yeah.
And so, I
Sure.
have that, and then I have other, sorry about that. I have other topics that I speak on. And then also in my coaching, as I said, I do recovery coaching, which I do use the Celebrate Recovery material.
Mhm.
And what I do is there are people who are just not willing to go and be part of a group. And so
Yes.
I'm willing to be your group,
Yes.
and to just help walk, to be the accountability partner for you and help you understand what's in that material. The person is going to do all the work. I'm just going to be the sounding board and the person to say, okay, have you done this yet?
Yeah.
Have you done
You
this
and I
yet?
are both doing that, and you're using the Celebrate Recovery process, and I'm, of course, using the Smudge
Right,
Pages. Got
right.
the book and got the workbook, and then people can walk through it coaching with me, or a small group online, because
Mhm.
sometimes feels less intimidating.
Right,
We're not in the same room, and I don't really know you, so this stranger across the screen feels a little safer maybe than someone who lives in
right.
my hometown, and I might run
Somebody I might
into
run
at the
into. Yeah,
yeah at the grocery store or whatever. Yeah. So
yeah.
um so Faye, in one nutshell, what is the truth, like the one truth that you feel like really turned the tide from you thinking, I have to fit this image of the perfect Christian, to I can live in freedom?
Hmm.
That might be tricky. I put you on the spot there.
Yeah, yeah. Just give me a second here to think about that. That's I don't know that there was any one thing. I mean, it
Okay.
was, it took a lot to get me to the point where I was believing that. So it took a lot to undo as well.
Sure.
Um,
And that's a good point. I think we should say that to people. This is not a one and done.
right.
Like, you can't just do one study, oh, and now I'm perfect, right? Like,
Yeah.
we keep walking. It's a continual journey. I'm sure you and I, there are days I am doing better at this. There are days that I still struggle, because our enemy is crafty, and he's
Yes, it
not
is.
going to say, oh, well, she did Celebrate Recovery or she did Smudge Pages or whatever, so now they're untouchable. No, he's still going to bombard us.
That would
You
be
know,
nice.
that would be nice. That would be nice. But he's going to bombard us with
Sure.
with his lies over and over again, the
And
lies.
that's
And you talked about that too. Um,
right. I guess that is the thing, is that I learned for years and years. I've I would tell, I mean, I would go into the jail and preach to these women there, taking a church service into them. And
yeah.
I would explain to them what the scriptures say and how he says that they are wonderful, that they are a masterpiece. And that, all these things, I would tell them truths from the scripture about who they actually are. And I would walk back out fully believing that that did not describe me.
Mm.
And so I had to get to the point where I would accept that those things that were true about them were also true about me.
Yes.
And
You
that,
know,
I think that
yes.
was that might be the nugget, is that you just have to accept it. You have to
Mm,
trust that he really is telling the truth about all of us.
mm.
And that's it. That is faith, is
That
believing
is
that
faith.
truth is for you
Yes.
as well.
That's such a good definition of faith. I love that. That's really good.
Yeah.
Well, we're about out of time, but it was sure nice to talk with you. I'm going to put links for everybody so they can find your material if they want. And I think I'd like to close today with just an encouragement that if you feel like, you've been walking in this place where you feel like I've got to do this and I've got to do this and I've got to do it, right? We get in that place where we feel like I've got to do all these things. I just want to challenge you to, like Faye talked about, can you shed those? I didn't cause this. This lie came, it was an attack from Satan. This is a lie, not a truth. Can we get rid of those and say, I don't have to do anything, because the grace of God covers all my mistakes and it covers all my blemishes and it covers all those things. It's easier to think about it covering, oh, God's got that for the addict, right? Or
Mhm.
whoever, but he's got it for the everyday, stay at home mama, or the
Yep.
lady working in the corporate office or whatever. He's got it for all of us. He
Yes.
doesn't want us jumping through hoops. He just wants us resting in who we are in
Yes.
him. So
Yes.
that's my encouragement and challenge for everyone today. So thanks, Faye, for joining us. This was so good.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
All right.